Did Jesus really exist? Today, we'll explore the archaeological evidence, or lack thereof, surrounding this question. When we delve into the world of archaeology, we find a curious silence. There is, as yet, no archaeological find directly attesting to the historical existence of Jesus. No personal belongings, no remnants of his carpentry, no physical traces of his crucifixion. This absence of material evidence might seem startling. How can such a figure, so pivotal to billions, leave no tangible imprint on the sands of time? Yet this absence is not as damning as it might first appear. Archaeology rarely provides direct evidence for specific individuals, especially from the lower classes of society. The common man, the carpenter, the fisherman, they often pass through history unseen by the archaeologist's lens. It's important to understand what this absence means. It doesn't necessarily disprove Jesus' existence, rather, it reminds us of the limitations of archaeology. While it can unearth ancient cities, decipher long-forgotten scripts, and tell us how our ancestors lived, it's less adept at confirming the existence of specific individuals, particularly those from over 2,000 years ago. Moreover, the absence of archaeological evidence doesn't contradict the textual evidence we have. It's not unusual for figures from antiquity to be known only through written accounts. Many historical figures, even some emperors and kings, leave little to no archaeological trace. So where does this leave us? The absence of archaeological evidence for Jesus doesn't necessarily undermine the textual evidence we have. It simply means we must tread carefully, scrutinizing each piece of evidence, each account, with a discerning eye. In the end, while archaeology doesn't provide direct evidence of Jesus, it doesn't necessarily disprove his existence either. It's a piece of the puzzle, a part of the broader tapestry of evidence we must weave together to form our understanding of the past. It invites us to dig deeper, to question and to explore the fascinating complex world of historical inquiry. From burial cloths to crucifixion nails, numerous relics tied to Jesus have surfaced over the centuries. As we delve into the world of relics, we find a multitude of items purported to be directly connected to Jesus, each with its own fascinating story. Take, for instance, the Shroud of Turin, a linen burial cloth that bears the faint image of a man who appears to have suffered physical trauma in a manner consistent with crucifixion. Controversy surrounds this relic as carbon dating results have been questioned, and the authenticity of the image is hotly debated. Yet, it continues to captivate the imagination of believers and skeptics alike. Then we have the Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny. Legend has it that this was the spear that pierced Jesus' side during his crucifixion. Over the centuries, several churches have claimed to possess this spear, each with a different story of how it came into their custody. And let's not forget the fragments of the true cross, reputedly the cross upon which Jesus was crucified. These fragments, scattered throughout the world in various churches, are often displayed with reverence despite the challenge of verifying their authenticity. In the realm of archaeology, some elements of the New Testament story of Jesus have been corroborated. For instance, the practice of Roman crucifixions during Jesus' time is well documented, lending credence to the gospel accounts of Jesus' death. Yet, it's important to note that these relics and archaeological findings, while fascinating, are not definitive proof of Jesus' existence. They are pieces of a historical puzzle, offering tantalizing hints about the life and times of a man who has profoundly influenced human history. Each relic, each archaeological find, invites us to question, to explore, to seek truth. They beckon us to look beyond the surface, to probe deeper into the past, and to engage with the mysteries of history. These relics, while intriguing, are not definitive proof of Jesus' existence, but they add another layer to the historical narrative. As we continue our journey, let's keep these relics in mind as they provide a tangible connection to the stories that have shaped our understanding of Jesus. The New Testament provides the most detailed account of Jesus' life and death. It's a collection of 27 books, including the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are central to our understanding of Jesus. These Gospels, penned by different authors, provide a narrative of Jesus' life, his teachings, his miracles, and his crucifixion. Yet it's important to consider the context in which these books were written. The authors were not disinterested historians, but followers of Jesus, writing decades after his death. Their aim was not only to record events, but also to spread the Christian faith. Naturally, this raises questions of bias and reliability. Take the Gospel of John, for instance, which paints a very different picture of Jesus compared to the other three Gospels. It presents Jesus as a divine figure, the Word of God, right from the start. This is in stark contrast to the Gospel of Mark, the earliest one written, which portrays Jesus as more human than divine. These differences have led scholars to question the reliability of the Gospels. Moreover, the New Testament writings were not the only texts penned by early Christians. There were other Gospels, letters, and accounts that didn't make it into the final canon. These excluded texts, often labeled as apocryphal, offer different perspectives on Jesus, further complicating our understanding of him. Yet, despite these potential biases, these records remain a crucial part of understanding the historical figure of Jesus. They provide an insight into how early Christians perceived him. They offer a glimpse into the life and teachings of a man who, 2,000 years later, continues to be a figure of immense significance. So, while the Gospels and other New Testament writings may not provide an unbiased historical account, they give us a wealth of information about the cultural and religious milieu of the time. They show us a man who was seen as a teacher, a prophet, a healer, and for many, the Son of God. Despite potential biases, these records remain a crucial part of understanding the historical figure of Jesus. Beyond the Bible, other historical records mention Jesus. One such account is found in the works of Tacitus, a Roman senator and historian. In his writings, known as Annals, Tacitus refers to Christ and his execution by Pontius Pilate. But how reliable is Tacitus as a historical source? Well, scholars regard Tacitus as one of the greatest Roman historians. Although he was writing about events that took place around 65 years before his birth, his reputation for accuracy is high. Another prominent reference comes from Flavius Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian. In his work, Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus mentions Jesus twice. However, these passages have been subject to intense scrutiny. Some scholars argue that they were later additions by Christian scribes, while others believe they are authentic. It's a complex debate, but these references, if authentic, provide non-Christian corroboration of Jesus' existence. Besides Tacitus and Josephus, there are other minor references to Jesus in ancient texts. These include the works of Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, and the Babylonian Talmud. While these accounts are brief and sometimes controversial, they further hint at the historical presence of a figure named Jesus. However, it's important to acknowledge the limitations and challenges with these non-biblical sources. They were often written decades after Jesus' supposed lifetime, and their authors had their own biases and agendas. Nevertheless, they provide us with pieces of a historical puzzle that, when combined with biblical accounts, help to form a broader picture. Moreover, let's not forget the broader historical context. The details of these accounts align with what we know about the Roman Empire and Judea during the 1st century. This consistency further supports the historical existence of Jesus. In conclusion, these non-biblical accounts, while not without their challenges, contribute to the historical understanding of Jesus. They remind us that history is a complex tapestry, woven from multiple threads of evidence, interpretation, and context. And in this tapestry, it seems a figure named Jesus indeed has a place. The context of the Roman Empire and the Second Temple period in Judea aligns with the accounts of Jesus' life. This statement sets the stage for us to delve into the historical consistency of the life of Jesus, as recounted in the New Testament, with the broader historical and cultural context of his time. Let's begin with the political landscape. The Roman Empire, under which Judea was a province, was a period marked by political unrest and rebellion. The New Testament presents Jesus as living under Roman rule, his crucifixion ordered by a Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. This political backdrop aligns with the historical accounts of the time. Equally important is the social environment. The New Testament paints a picture of a society divided along lines of wealth, power, and religious beliefs. We see Jesus interacting with various social groups, from the marginalized and poor to the powerful and wealthy. This social stratification is well documented in historical accounts of Roman-era Judea. Now let's turn to the religious aspect. The Second Temple period in Judea was a time of religious diversity and tension. The New Testament depicts Jesus as a Jew, teaching in synagogues, observing Jewish customs, and engaging in debates with religious leaders. This portrayal is consistent with what we know of the religious climate during that era. However, it's important to remember that historical consistency does not equate to historical accuracy. Just because the accounts of Jesus' life align well with the historical context doesn't definitively prove his existence. It does, however, lend credibility to the New Testament as a source of historical information. As we peel back the layers of history, we are reminded of the complexity and richness of the past. We see a world in flux, a society grappling with political, social, and religious change. And within this world we find the accounts of Jesus' life, a narrative that fits seamlessly into the tapestry of the time. In conclusion, this historical consistency adds credibility to the existence of Jesus as a historical figure. While it doesn't provide irrefutable proof, it does build a compelling case for Jesus as a person who lived and breathed in a specific time and place in history. Historians use certain criteria to assess the authenticity of historical figures. How does Jesus measure up? When historians get down to the brass tacks of verifying the existence of a historical figure, they have a few key tools in their arsenal. Let's break these down and see how they apply to Jesus. First up is multiple attestation. This means that the figure or event appears in multiple independent sources. The more the merrier, as it adds weight to the claim. In the case of Jesus, we have references in the Gospels, letters of early Christians, and even in some non-Christian sources like the works of Tacitus and Josephus, which we discussed earlier. This gives us a solid base as Jesus is attested in multiple unrelated sources. Next, we have contextual credibility. This means the events associated with the figure align with the known historical and cultural context. The life of Jesus, as depicted in the Gospels, fits well within the broader context of the Roman Empire and the socio-political climate in Judea during the Second Temple period. Finally, we have the criterion of embarrassment. This refers to details that early followers would have been reluctant to invent because they might be embarrassing or detrimental to their cause. One example for Jesus is his crucifixion, a form of execution reserved for the lowest criminals. This would have been an awkward fact for early Christians to admit, leading many historians to consider it a likely historical event. However, we must remember that these criteria are just tools, not definitive proof. They provide a framework for analysis, but they can't erase all doubt. The nature of historical research, especially in the case of figures from antiquity like Jesus, inherently involves some level of uncertainty. And of course, interpretations can vary among scholars. While some criteria are met, the limitations of historical research mean that there is always an element of uncertainty. So, given all this evidence, what do historians believe about the existence of Jesus? Well, let's take a step back. We've walked through the archaeological evidence, or lack thereof, for Jesus. We've discussed various relics and their authenticity. We've delved into the most detailed records of Jesus' life and death, including the 4 Gospels and other New Testament writings, and we've scrutinized their credibility. We've also explored non-biblical accounts of Jesus, from Tacitus's mention in his Annals to Josephus's references in Antiquities of the Jews, and even other minor references. We acknowledged the challenges and criticisms associated with these sources and considered their historical context within the Roman Empire and Judea. We've looked at the historical consistency of the general context of the Roman Empire and the Second Temple period in Judea, and how they align with the accounts of Jesus' life. We've applied criteria of authenticity such as multiple attestation, contextual credibility, and the criterion of embarrassment to assess Jesus' historical existence. And what we found is, despite the lack of definitive, indisputable evidence, there is a consensus among historians, a consensus that a historical figure named Jesus likely existed in the 1st century. This consensus is not born out of thin air or a leap of faith. It is the result of rigorous historical analysis, a careful weighing of evidence, and a thoughtful interpretation of the available sources. The understanding of the details of Jesus' life is, to some extent, shaped by a combination of biblical accounts, non-Christian sources, and historical analysis. It's important to remember, though, that the nature of historical research often involves a degree of uncertainty. Interpretations may vary, and some scholars argue for a more minimalistic historical Jesus, emphasizing the scarcity of direct evidence. So, while there is no definitive, indisputable evidence, the consensus among historians is that a historical figure named Jesus likely existed in the 1st century. And that, dear listeners, is where we find ourselves in the quest to understand the historical existence of Jesus.